Hi, my people. Today I am reading a new book. Well, it's not new, but it's new for me, and hopefully it is new for you. It is by C.J. Box. It is called The Disappeared. It's a Joe Pickett novel. This is the first time I am ever reading a Joe Pickett novel series. So, this is the first. We're gonna hopefully do it together. I'm going to read the first 2 to 3 chapters. So let's get started, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So let's get started. Part 1. He ain't getting nowhere, and he's losing his share. He must have gone crazy out there. Mitchell Burton, Night Riders, Lamlet. Chapter 1. Wiley Frey was used to smelling of smoke, and that was long before he became a criminal of sorts. Wood smoke permeated his clothing, his hair, and his full black beard to the point that he didn't notice it anymore. He was only reminded of his peculiar odor when drinkers on the next bar stool or patrons standing in line at the come-and-go convenience store leaned away from him and turned their heads to breathe untainted air. But he didn't mind. He smelled worse at times, and his life and wood smoke wasn't so bad. On cold nights like this, after he'd used the front end loader to deliver bucket after bucket of sawdust to the burner from a small mountain of it near the mill, he could relax in the burner shack and let the warmth of the fire and the sweet blanket of smoke engulf him. Wiley sat at a metal desk under a light fixture mounted in the wall behind him and stared at the dark screen of his cell phone. It was 2:45 in the morning, and his visitor was 15 minutes late. Wiley was starting to fidget. He watched the screen because he knew he wouldn't hear the phone chime with an incoming text over the roar from the fire outside. In the rustling shack where Wiley sat 50 feet from the base of the burner, it sounded like he was inside a jet engine. The west wall, which was made of corrugated steel and faced the burner, radiated enough heat that he couldn't touch it with his hand. In the deep January winter of the upper North Platte River Valley, Wiley had the warmest blue-collar job of anyone he knew. So there was that. If he had to stink in order to stay warm on the job, it was a trade-off he was willing to take. He still had nightmares about that winter he spent working outside on a fracking rig in North Dakota, where he lost 2 toes and the tip of his little finger to frostbite. Every minute or so, Wiley looked up from the phone on the desk to a small opal portrait window that faced the road outside, expecting to see headlights approaching. He couldn't see exactly because the smoke left a film on the glass that distorted the view. Even thought he wiped it clear nightly with Windex. There was nothing to see, thought. It wasn't just the heat from the fire that was making him sweat. He tapped the top of the desk with his fingertips in a manic rhythm. He felt more then heard his belly surge with acid, and he tasted the green chili burrito he'd eaten for dinner at the Bear Trap in Riverside. It was going to be a long night. The console steel structure known alternately as a beehive, tippet, or wigwam burner for its resemblance to each roared in the dark and belched a solemn column of wood smoke into the frigid night sky of Encampment, Wyoming. The burner was 50 feet high, and its fuel was sawdust from the mill. Its biggest fires took place at night by design, when sleeping residents couldn't see the volume of smoke and complain about it. The flames often burned so hot that the walls of the wigwam glowed red like the cherry on a massive cigar, and erratic sparks drifted out of the steel mess at the top like shooting stars. When the base was filled with sawdust and fully aflame, the temperature inside exceeded 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. There was a window of time to do what they wanted to do. He told the men who would be texting him, even thought it was rare when anybody was up and around in the middle of the night in an encampment, a tiny mountain hamlet of barely 400 people at the base of the Sierra Madre Range. There was a very specific window of time when their plan would work. It lasted from 2:15 to around 3:30. After 2, some drunks were still driving around after the trio of bars in the meeting area closed. There was a bar for every 150 residents, which Wiley thought was just right. 2 bars side by side in the tiny village of Riverside with its population of 50 residents, and 1 bar in adjoining encampments. When the 2 o'clock finally came around, they closed. Ranch hands headed back to their bunkhouses. Lumberjacks went home for a few hours of sleep, and unemployed drunks drove off to wherever unemployed drunks went. Wiley could see the last drinkers of the night through the portal, either driving recklessly up McCaffrey or motoring home so slowly and cautiously it was almost comical. Large clouds of condensation coughed out of their tailpipes in the cold, and he could sometimes see the drivers themselves if they were inebriated and had forgotten to shut off their interior dome lights. But he couldn't hear the vehicles because of the roar of the fire. He couldn't hear anything. The town cop known as Jalen Spanks. He'd been given the nickname Jalen Spanks, his monkey, by the regulars at the bear trap. Did the same routine every night, arriving at 3:30 often. Wiley would emerge from his burn shack and wave hello. In return, Jalen would raise 2 fingers from the steering wheel in a reciprocal salute. Sometimes when it wasn't below 0 outside, Jalen would roll down his driver's side window and ask Wiley how he was doing. Wiley kept his response pleasant and short. He didn't want to become friends with Jalen the cop, because Jalen the cop was kind of a dick, who took himself and the authority his uniform bestowed upon him a little bit too seriously. Wiley thought too many small-town cops were like that. Wiley looked at his phone again. They were 20 minutes late. If they didn't show soon, they might run the risk of being at the mill when Jalen cruised through. That could be a hell of a situation, one that Wiley would have a tough time explaining away without incriminating himself and getting fired or worse. So when his phone lit up with the message, "running late," Wiley said aloud, "No shit." 5 minutes appeared in the text balloon immediately afterwards. "Better fucking hurry," Willie antomized, then hit the bricks. Yeah, Wiley said as he pulled on his heavy current coat and jammed a stormy Cromer rancher hat over his head with the ear flaps down. It's a lot of reading. He thrust his hand in the pocket and stepped outside the shack in time to see a pair of headlights turn his way from the road. The cold instantly tightened the exposed skin of his face, and Wiley tucked his chin into his coat and walked away from the burn shack and the burner. He guessed it was 20 below 0. Based on how quickly the crystals formed inside his nose as he breathed in, he wasn't supposed to see the vehicle come in or the faces of the men inside, or observe what they were doing at the wigwam burner. That was the deal. That was the reason Wiley was a criminal of sorts. In the version told by Jet Pryor, the owner of the mill, the United States Forest Service had sat idly by while pine beetles bored into nearly every tree in Sierra Madre Range and over 10 years killed them where they stood. While millions of board feet of lumber went to waste, hundreds of unemployed timber workers stared at the mountains as they turned from pine green to rust brown. Only after several 5-month-long fires had gone out of control were the logging roads reopened. The federal policy of not logging the dying trees had something to do with combating global warming. Pryor complained. Now thousands of dead pine trees were being hauled down from the mountains. The big lumber mills in Saratoga, 18 miles to the north, as well as the encampment mill, the much smaller outfit where Wiley worked as a night manager. Beetle-killed lumber was different from traditional pine, and it surprised nearly everyone when there was a high demand for it. Unlike regular pine, beetle-killed wood containing containing bores within the lumber that were often tinted blue and green. These bore holes gave it character that furniture makers and designers seemed to prize. The Saratoga mill was struggling to harvest the dead timber in the mountains after it burned or rotted and fell apart. After he lost his job in North Dakota, Wiley had jumped at the opportunity to work at the mill, even though it paid less and the hours were brutal. But Wiley had child support payments for 2 daughters and a wife who had left him but refused to work. Plus, he wanted to surely improve his garage into a shop where he could tinker with discarded personal computers and reload his own ammunition. And there were all those gambling debts from his disastrous foray into the world of online poker. So when he received a call a few months before from an unknown number while he sat at the desk up in the burner shack, he punched it up out of curiosity and stepped outside so he could hear the man on the other end had known his name, his occupation, and his hours at the mill. He'd asked about the temperature of the burner at full capacity. His deep, almost gruff voice had sounded like steel fly sawing on a length metal pipe. It was a strident voice, the kind that usually made Wiley bristle because it meant authority, but Wiley had listened anyway. The man asked, would Riley Frey like to pick up some extra money by doing literally next to nothing? Wiley was interested. He'd asked the man what he had in mind and was told that if he needed that answer, the deal was off. Wiley said he really didn't need to know. Just tell me you're not planning to burn hazardous waste, Wiley said. I got to breathe the air around here. It's not hazardous material, the man assured him, and now it was an ongoing thing. Every 10 days to 2 weeks they showed up. Up at the mill now, he circled the sawdust pile on foot, carefully not to stare at the burner or the vehicle below. They obviously backed their truck to the feeder door through. Thought Willie had seen headlights from the pickup sweep across the front of the mill as it did a 3-point turn. After a second circle around the pile, Willie noted that the pickup was driving away. They worked quickly. He watched as the red tail lights narrowed in the dark. The pickup turned onto the road, headed north towards Saratoga. He was surprisingly how rapidly his legs had stiffened in the cold despite the flannel-lined jeans he wore, and he beat it back towards the burner shack. He was nearly to the door when he suddenly bathed in white light. Wiley turned on his heels, his eyes wide. Out for a stroll? Jalen Spanks asked from his open SUV window. Wiley had not seen the cop enter the yard because the burner had blocked his view of the side road. Had Spanks seen the departing vehicle? Just getting some air, Wiley says. He raised his glove back down to block the beam. Kind of a cold night for that, isn't it? It's cold as a witch's tit, all right, Wiley says. He nodded towards the shack, but it gets pretty smoky in there. Spanks slid his spotlight to the side so it wouldn't continue to blind Wiley. You really got that thing blasted tonight, Spanks said. Wiley wasn't sure whether it was a statement or a question. It was something a cop would say. It'll start to burn down, Wiley said. I put the last bucket of sawdust in it for the night. Any more and you'll heat the whole town. And that's a bad thing, Wiley thought, but didn't say. It had been Arctic cold in the area for a week. Spanks leaned towards the open window and sniffed the air. What's that smell? Burning wood? No. There's something else, it seems to me. Wiley smelled it too, the cryptic and distant smell of burning hair, and something that smelled a little like roast chicken. Wiley kept his gloves up so Spanks couldn't see his face, even though the spotlight wasn't as direct as it had been. Oh, Wiley said, I threw the garbage in the fire. That's probably what it is. Guys throw what's left of their lunches in garage barrel. Ah, is that a problem? Wiley asked. Do you mean a permit or something to throw out garbage? I don't think so, but I'll ask the chief, Spanks said. Okay. Well, Spanks said as his window whirled back up. Have a good night. You too, Wiley said. The police SUV rolled away, gravel crunching under the tires. Wiley set out a long, shivering breath. Inside on the desk was the envelope. In it was $2,500 in cash. As agreed. Wiley closed his eyes for a moment, and he tried not to think about what the men in the pickup had tossed into the burner. Wherever it was had turned to ash by now, and Wiley, his kids, and his garage needed the money. Chapter 2. Carol Skimmett smelled it too. Skimmett was a bird-like woman, 69 years old, and wearily, a woman who kept active even when she didn't need to. Aside from her full-time job as a checker and bagger at Valley Foods, she crocheted Afghans for hospital vets, attended both boys and girl games at Encampment High School, and was past president of the garden club. She stood behind the storm door waiting for Bridger, her dog, to do his business in the snow in a small backyard. Bridger was an 8-year-old, 85-pound, three-legged Molly slash golden retriever cross. She watched him impatiently as he strolled through the shadows, sniffing this and that. His white snout and legs picked up what little light there was, his tail straight up and swinging back and forth like a metronome. There was no use rushing him. If she opened the storm door and hissed at him to hurry, he'd obeyed and come running to get back into the house. But if he hadn't tended to his business, she just had to let him back out later. Now that she didn't curse him a little while, she waited. "Damn you, Bridger boy. Hurry up." She felt guilty about it. He was always so cheerful when he came through the back door that he cheered her up as well. She loved how something as simple as relieving himself made Bridger happy night after night, as if it were the first time that particularly wonderful experience had ever taken place in his life. She envied him. Bridger had been Paul's last dog. Her husband had brought the puppy home 8 years before, after he'd found it on the side of Battle Mountain Road. Paul had been returning from his job as a lumberjack in the mountains, and the puppy had been hit by a car or truck and left to die. When Paul had come through the front door of their house with that whimpering little ball of big and white fur and that look in his eyes, she knew at that moment they would have to keep the dog, no matter what, no matter how much the vet bills added up for the surgery, repair the internal injuries, or for removing the puppy's mangled front leg. Paul had named the pup Bridger because Paul said the mountain man of the same name had long hair just like their new dog, and Jim Bridger had once abandoned a man and left him to die. Carl had never understood the analogy. Now Bridger was her only company. It had been 2 years since Paul had died from injuries when his logging truck lost its brakes and missed a turn coming down Battle Mountain Road. The full load of green timber on the trailer had created such a momentum that it had made it impossible for him to stop. After the EMTs had cut him out of his cab with the jaws alike, Paul had lingered with severe head injuries in the Memorial Hospital of Carbon County in Rawlins for 3 days and 3 nights before passing away. He never regained consciousness, and she spent most of her time trying to recall the last conversation they had. She narrowed it down. Paul, putting on his coat before the sun was up. "What did you pack for me for lunch?" Carol, 2 bologna sandwiches, Pringles, and string cheese. Good, I like string cheese. Once deep into the second night at the hospital, his eyelids had fluttered and his grip tightened on her little tiny hand. He'd said one word, Bridger, not Carol. She hadn't held it against him. She figured he wasn't in his right mind and that his last thought was about the most vulnerable among them. So she stood behind the frosted glass that glowed orange from the light of the wood burner across the way and waited for Bridger. She'd thrown Paul's old cardigan logging coat over her nightgown. It still smelled to him, diesel fuel and pine sawdust. She also wore a pair of high-top squirrel-pack boots over her bare feet. Even with the storm door closed, the cold night air seeped in. The single inch of exposed bare calf between the helm of the coat and the top of the boots stung with it. Despite that, she cracked the door and sniffed. She was used to the prevailing smell of wood smokes, didn't mind it at all. The odor seemed warm in itself and it reminded her of Paul. If their long marriage had an official smell, she thought it would have been wood smoke. But there was something else in the air, and it reminded her of something unpleasant from her childhood. It had been so long ago and so repressed that she hadn't thought about it for decades. It bothered her that the older she got, the more she recalled from her early youth. And the less she remembered from the week before. Skimmish was afraid she had a front row seat to early stages of her own dementia, so she put that recollection aside. The burner was hot and glowing as she watched the silhouettes of a pickup pass in front of it, which was odd at that time of night because her proximity. Carol Skimmish was a student of the mill across the road. She knew when the shifts changed, when the fresh-cut loads of lumber arrived from the mountains where the sawdust and scrapes were hauled down to the burner before dark. She knew that the only employee on the site was a caretaker of the burner itself, and he wouldn't be driving around the yard in a late model pickup with a camper shell in the back of it. After a few minutes, the pickup turned and came down the access road with its headlights off, which is also odd. Scrimmage stepped back farther from the frosted glass of the storm door so she couldn't be seen. She could make out the outline of the pickup clearly because it was backlit by the orange glow of the mill. The truck was silver or gray. She saw the heads of two men inside the cab. The pickup slowed as it approached the service road and its lights came on and bathed the Skimmer's house. Carol stepped back further. Of course, it was at that moment that Bridger finally lifted his leg and urinated and bounded back toward the house. But she kept her eyes on the pickup. It turned left and accelerated aggressively on the road behind her, back fence and through the stop sign on the road towards the highway that led to Saratoga. There was a screech of tires, a rabbit thump, thump, and the yelp of a dog. The truck had run over one of the neighbor's packs. She watched as the vehicle stopped, the engine still running, pausing like the driver didn't know what had happened. The dome light inside the cab came on as the passenger, a dark man in coveralls, opened his door and started to climb outside. She couldn't see the passenger's face because the light was behind him, and she couldn't see the driver, and she could hear him bark. "Forget it. Leave the goddamn dog. It shouldn't be out running around anyway." His voice was grating and it cut straight through the cold night air. "You sure?" the passenger said. "Close the door before someone sees us," the driver ordered. The passenger did as commanded and the truck lurched and drove away. One of the few street lights in the town, the encampment was on her corner and it cast a light blue glow. A light blue glow in the night. She got a glimpse of the gray pickup and the logo in writing as well as the last three numbers of the license plate. 600. Bridger whined and did a clumsy dance on the other side of the door. He didn't like it when the snow packed between his claws on the single front paw. She stepped forward and opened the door, and Bridger rushed in and sat down on the rug so she could remove the ice from his foot. And as she did, she thought 600. His hands trembled from what she'd witnessed. After Bridger padded off to go to sleep, she called her neighbor. The phone rang 8 times before a man with Belgium in his throat answered. "Do you know what time it is?" "I do. This is Carol Sims next door. I don't know if you heard it, but I think one of your dogs got hit in the road." "Who is this?" "Carol Skirmint, your neighbor." She could hear him muffle the receiver and turn to someone and say, "It's that old lady next door." A woman moaned and then, "Forget it," he said. "We got too many dogs as it is. I could probably identify the truck and the driver. Carol, I'm asking you this politely. Even thought you woke me up. Mind your own business. I got part of the license number. Carol, my son went off to Alaska and he left us 3 dogs. I never wanted any of them. I don't mind being down one." "That's so sad," she said. "Go to bed, Carol," he said, and hung up the phone. Skimmet was halfway to her bedroom with Bridget padding alongside when she said, "Dang it," and turned back around on her heel and picked the phone up and dialed 911. The 24-hour dispatch center for the whole valley was located in Saratoga, and she knew from experience that the woman dispatcher who pulled the late shift could be Shirley. "I need to report a hit and run on a dog," Skimmet said. "I got a partial plate number." She could hear the dispatcher take a long drag on a cigarette before asking, "Is this Miss Skimmet again?" "Yes, it is. I thought I recognized your voice. You called about barking dogs last week?" "Right." "Yes, I did," Skimmet said. "And do you remember when you called that?" "I told you this line is for emergencies." "Yes." "Is it your dog?" "No, I think it was my neighbor's dog." "Would you consider that an emergency, Miss Skimmet?" "Well, it is for the dog." Skimmet sniffed a bit. Dispatcher blew out a long stern of air, probably smoke, Skimmet guessed. "We need to get off the line in case a real emergency call comes in," the dispatcher says. "There is no need to take that tone." Another sigh. "I'll tell you what. I'll make a report and send it on to the Encampment Police Department. Deputy Spinks could come by sometime tomorrow to follow up. That's the best I can do." "Deputy Spinks has been no help at all with my previous calls," Skimmet said. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Skimmet. There's also an unpleasant smell in the air," Skimmet said. "It's coming from the mill." "Is it wood smoke?" Skimmet stamped her foot. "Young lady, I know what wood smoke smells like. This is different." "I'll add that to the report," the dispatcher said dismissively. "What about the dog out there?" Skimmet asked. "I'm sorry, I can't help you with that," the dispatcher said. Shaken and angered at the state of the Saratoga Encampment Police Department and wondering how to file a formal complaint against the dispatcher, she cracked the back door again. The mill was empty of vehicles as it should be. The burner roared. She could hear the dog whimper out on the road as it lay breathing. Tears froze on her cheeks as she crunched down the snow with the .38 she kept in her purse. No dog should suffer like that, she thought. Then she got around a whiff of the air of the smell from the burner that had bothered her, and she tried to recall when, as a child, she'd first smelled the acrid odor of burning flesh. I'm only gonna read that's the end of it today. I read the first 2 chapters. I hope you like it. I did so far. I think it's pretty interesting. I want to learn more of the manager. He's kind of odd that he would take up a job that he doesn't really know who it is or what they are doing or something. But I might have another chapter tonight or early tomorrow morning. No, not early, probably late, because I gotta work. Okay, well, that is it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my page, and bye!